Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of another great conversation. We seem to be having incredible conversations as I come across very, very interesting people and ask if they would wish to come and have a conversation for all of us to learn more about their work and what they've learned along their journey. So today we have Beth, and I have just catched up on her bio today and read through her website, and she definitely has a wealth of experience within these circles. So hello, Beth, and thank you for agreeing to this conversation.
Hello, Jeremy. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
No problem. So could you just start by giving us a very brief, and this always is quite difficult for people to answer because to be brief when you've got such a wealth of knowledge as I know you have is challenge. But could you just be brief and just explain a little bit about you, your work and your history?
Yes, I spent 25 years. I retired last June working for a county probation department here in the States. And I spent about 25 years with the department, mainly in the sex crimes division, sex offender division. So I supervised sex offenders that were on probation. I also, for the last 14 years of my career, managed a unit of officers. So I was in management there, and they supervise people on probation for sex offenses. I've developed trainings for supervision. I've been trained on a variety of different risk assessments related to sex offender management. I retired last June to go into consulting. So now I consult on a variety of different sex cases, sex issues. I also provide trainings related to sex offender risk management and inform families and people impacted by the justice system, impacted by sex crimes. So kind of in a nutshell, that's what I'm doing now, is consulting on sex cases and providing trainings.
Okay, and that's an incredible career, by the way. So let's start with the big topic that I keep trying my best to bring to my platforms with kickback every time from a large percentage of my audience, which is the discussion around sex offenders, people who have either commit the crime already or have the thought of the crime in their head. I'm going to ask you a massive question to start with, and that is, why do you think we're so angry at this conversation that we can't have it in a what I want to say mature way? It's just pure anger and such a rash. Why do you think we can't have a conversation around this topic?
Jeremy, I think it is so emotional. It is such an emotional topic. And I think it's also a topic that so many people don't understand, but we have a lot of just preconceived notions, right, about sex offenses and sex offenders. And if you commit a sex crime, you are the worst person. You should be locked away forever. But in reality, each sex offender, each sex case is so different. But the one thing they do have in common with each other is a victim was created, right?
Mm,
A victim was created. They hurt someone, and there should definitely be amends to that person. How does that work? How do we do that? And because we don't want people reoffending, correct? We
right.
do not want reoffenses. We don't want offenses. But I think this is such an emotional topic for people. It involves children. It involves, sometimes violence. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing, because I think we need to have more conversations surrounding sex offenses and healing people and families, which that is still to this day one of the most important parts of my job that I love, because I've seen that healing process, can occur with families and with people. And it's a beautiful thing when it can happen. It doesn't always happen. There are some people that do horrendous things, and they don't want to change. They do not want to better themselves. But I think this is just an emotional topic, I would say,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
people.
Yes, and I'm definitely experiencing the kickback and the emotion every time I try to present this topic, because as you said, which we all agree with, of course we don't want the offense to happen in the first place.
Mhm.
But when somebody's convicted of committing this crime, we also do not want them to ever commit it again.
Yes.
Now, of course, the biggest response that I get on most of my platforms, and each one interestingly behaves a little differently, is the way to stop an offender reoffending again is just to kill them. And that's the most common response that I get, in particular on TikTok. It's a ruthless platform, TikTok is. But on my LinkedIn page and my Twitter page, the conversation is slightly different. Facebook is very emotive as well. So they're all behaving slightly differently. Instagram has a slightly different conversation coming because, of course, we know that the death sentence isn't a punishment that's given for this crime. We know that. So unless we're going to go out there and campaign for that, I feel like just saying it all the time is a very frustrating waste of time, right? So let's look at other ways that we can stop that person from reoffending again. The next conversation, put them in prison forever. Now, actually, a couple of weeks ago on the news, national TV, I should say, here in England, there was a lawyer and a campaigner that had a little debate on a breakfast show. And the lawyer, very interestingly, said, in England, there are 100,000 sex offenders on the register. To put them all in jail is impossible because our prison capacity is 85,000, right? And it's already full. So to lock them up and throw away the key is also not an option. So where's the conversation going to go to next? How are we going to encourage these people to not reoffend? Like, what was your work with sex offenders like in that 25 years? Can you give us a bit of an insight?
Sure, absolutely. Some of the guys came straight out from sentencing to probation supervision. Most of the guys, the offenders, they did some sort of prison sentence, whether it was 5 years in prison, 10 years in prison. Now, historically, I have to say, when I first started in this career, people would get, and this was just obviously in my jurisdiction, my county, they would get a standard 10 years in prison and they would come out on lifetime probation supervision.
Okay.
That has kind of dwindled in recent years. And we can make the argument whether that's good or bad. In my experience, meeting and supervising thousands of sexual offenders, I happen to believe the ones that came out of prison. Now, we have a prison here that actually starts therapy and treatment in prison. And those offenders that came out that had had some therapy and treatment and were in prison were probably some of the best prepared offenders to get their life back on track, that they took this seriously. They did not want to reoffend. They wanted to get better, as opposed to, I noticed, again, this is not a scientific, experience, but this is just my experience working with this population. The offenders that came straight out of sentencing with little to absolutely no jail time, no therapy, no treatment, were probably much more entitled. They were not prepared to change their behavior, change their life. They just weren't. So I guess take that for what it's worth, whether it's a combination of maybe some incarceration time, treatment, I believe does work for many people, the ones that want it to work.
Right.
So that's just kind of a little bit of the sentencing structures here, and what I found those offenders were. And then, but we also have to take into account maybe their deviancy level too, Jeremy. So some offenders do not have, they may commit a sex crime, but they are not what's called paraphilic or sexually deviant. So if you want me to get into that just briefly, okay.
Please.
Some offenders that are, diagnosed by a therapist or a doctor, they'll take assessments where they have a sexual deviancy that they have to manage for the rest of their life. So they may be born or develop a sexual attraction to prepubescent children. That would be sexually deviant, because I don't believe anybody in this, well, on their right mind, would believe it's okay to have sex with young children. But there are people that they have to fight that urge, right? They have to fight that. That is something they have to wake up every day and choose to manage. And I want to say this is not the vast majority of sexual offenders that have this, but the ones that do, it could be exposures. You can be an exhibitionist that has to manage that sexual deviancy. You cannot expose yourself. And some people will laugh about that offense, but it's actually quite serious. Studies have shown that most rapists start as exposure. So it's not really like, a fun, it's a serious crime.
Wow.
Right. So it really just depends on, was this a crime of opportunity that, if someone had sex with, say, a 16-year-old, it psychologists will tell us it is normal for grown men to be attracted to, say, the 15, 16, 17-year-old females. Now, it's not okay to act on that, but it's because they may look like adult women.
Right.
So that's not, a deviant sexual interest, unless, you know what I mean? So
Yes.
I know I'm kind of going off on
No, I love it. Love it. Keep going, please.
But okay, so that's important to note, that offenders who may have sex with teenage girls, of course it is wrong. It is a boundary violation. It is something that is not appropriate, and in many countries, states, it's illegal. And you should be, but that's not someone who may be sexually deviant. They would prefer adult women. They have normal relationships with adult females or males. But it's really, what I would say is most important to kind of figure out when you're either managing offenders or supervising offenders, or when we talk about sexual offending, it's really trying to identify who has these sexual deviancies that we have to be watching and focusing. And I know it might sound, crazy to some in your audience, but you want to support them. And what that means is the family support and therapist support, these people have to be able to talk about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what is on their mind. So they don't reoffend. Because if they're isolated, if they are not given the treatment, that is when they go down that path, right? They go online, they'll look for potential victims. That's when that occurs. So it's really understanding who has the sexual deviancy and who may not.
Okay. So then we start to think about a spectrum of offenders, right? So we have the offender who has real sexual deviancy and has been offending for decades and has been caught and now has served his prison sentence and is released. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have a young man who exposed themselves once, and that's their crime. The sexual deviancy is different for those two people, so we should treat them. Their rehabilitation or the treatment of them should also be different. I'm just trying to think about what people will be feeling right now. It's like our view towards those two criminals should be different. They're still criminals, right? But they're at different ends of the spectrum, even though they've both committed a sexual crime.
Yes, exactly. And then how is their rehabilitation in the community going? So the treatment program, because they committed a crime, they created a victim, their treatment may be the same. But how are they then managing themselves in the community? And that's where supervision comes in. That's why supervision is so important. And then, we do have lifetime probation here in the state of Arizona, where I'm from. I don't think every state does, or every country may. And we do have a pathway off lifetime probation. We do have something that's called early termination. And but really, there needs to be some time that goes, into longevity, right? So when someone's going to change their behavior, you have to have a certain amount of time to say, you know what, this person's passing polygraphs, this person is holding down a job, this person is, we do ask a lot about someone's masturbation practices on supervision. And that's really important to know what their sexual fantasies are, and making sure they're not reinforcing any sexually deviant thoughts that they may have. So that's important to talk about probation treatment. Now, when someone successfully graduates from treatment, the question then becomes is they'll be on probation still. Can they manage themselves in the community without treatment? Have they internalized treatment? Can they use those the good coping skills that they learned from treatment to manage themselves? So everyone has an offense cycle. Offenders have offense cycles that they learn about in treatment. And so that may start with victim posturing, where, say you lose your job, or say you break up with someone, say someone wrongs you. Well, most of us will think, I had a bad day, or this is a hard time. And, we lean on family and friends. We maybe go on vacation. There's healthy ways to cope with these things that make us feel really sad. Well, offenders may go into victim posture, and they will then go down this path of, I'm going to look at pornography. So I'm going to isolate, I'm going to go online, right. I'm going to look at, now looking at pornography for them is an unhealthy coping mechanism. They're not being honest with their support system, their mothers or fathers or wives or friends, saying, I'm really sad right now. They will go online or look at pornography, or maybe child pornography, or go start chatting online, maybe using prostitutes, things that are unhealthy behaviors for someone who may offend, or in this case, if they're on supervision, reoffend. So if they've been in treatment, they should know that a death, a loss, a loss of a job, they should learn at this point what they need to do to manage themselves, so they're not going online chatting with potential minors or looking at pornography to help them cope. So they need to, like on supervision, so post-treatment, can they manage themselves properly in the community prior to then early terminating from probation, when the court says, okay, we can trust you now to manage yourself and not create new victims. That's what a court here would be looking for if they were going to early terminate someone.
Okay, so during this treatment cycle, we are educating, informing, and training that offender to recognize when they are using an unhealthy outlet in reaction to something that's happened in their personal life. And if they can recognize that that something's gone on in their personal life that sent them on a quick route of destruction, path of destruction, they feel tempted to open up that pornography, they feel tempted to go after this or go after that. We're trying to train them to recognize those behaviors and not actually carry them out, because that is an unhealthy route for that type of person.
Correct. Say you are dealing with someone that has a paraphilic behavior or a second.
What is that word? What is that word?
Paraphilic.
What is that?
So it means para and then philia. It's like sexual deviancy. So not normal sexual behavior. So, and I always, when I'm in trainings, I teach people, don't think of it as, grown adults who are engaging in adult sexual behaviors, right? So if you're in a relationship with a man or a woman, and let's say you want to look at pornography, that's not really what this is. Anyone can have their judgments on that, but that's not what this, that is like how I go back to, it's not okay to expose your penis in front of children, or it's not okay to have sex with children. Those are kind of, that's what, like a sexual deviancy in this case, in sex offender management, we would say. So there could be, there's, I think, several. Pedophilia, this word gets tossed around a lot, but that's an actual diagnosis. Not someone that has sex with a child doesn't mean they are a pedophile. They might have pedophilic interests. But like pedophilia, you have to be diagnosed by a psychologist, as that's your primary sexual interest, is prepubescent children. Right. So that's what I mean by paraphilia. So back to your treatment question, if someone is paraphilic, it's even more important for them to understand their offense cycle. And when they start getting into a mood state that is very leading them, could potentially lead them down a path that is destructive for them, where they are going to hurt someone else, reoffend. They have to stop themselves. And that's what treatment, one of the things, I mean, treatment is amazing. And there's so much to go into there, but that's one thing. One component of treatment is understanding what that looks like for you, for any offender. But any of us can get right into a bad mood state. It's just we don't go out and hurt people.
Right.
So but this person has, and so they learn what that looks like for them and what they need to do to make sure they don't go down a path that is going to hurt someone else and really hurt themselves, because they'll go back to prison.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I just would love to get into this terminology quickly again, because I know actually through being called out a couple of times that I am using the incorrect terminology. So a paedophile is somebody who has committed an offense to a sexual offense to a prepubescent child. Is that correct?
It is someone who, this is usually done by assessments. So they'll go see a psychologist, and because they don't even have to be convicted. You could have people who are pedophiles that have never been convicted yet, right? They haven't been caught.
Right.
So these are people that are diagnosed by a psychologist as someone whose primary sexual interest is in children. Okay. But not everyone who has sex, say, with a child is technically, they'd have to be assessed, is what I'm saying.
Right. Because you could have somebody who has sex with a child, but it's not their primary attraction, right? So then we're saying anyone, but what about so that's the paedophile definition for prepubescent children, but what about post-pubescent children? What's their label?
So the term there would be hebephile.
Okay.
And so, but not everyone that, again, commits a crime against a post-pubescent child is a hebephile. But there are people whose primary sexual interest, that is their preference.
Right.
So again, finding out through assessments, through their treatment providers, they need to know that. They need to be aware of that, and they need treatment to understand, because it is hard for offenders to understand that about themselves, right? That they sometimes start and live in denial sometimes, right? We don't want to believe the worst things about ourselves, or we don't want to, so they need to work with their treatment provider to understand what their sexual issues, or if they have any deviancies. So that would be someone who's a hebephile. But again, not everybody who does that is a hebephile, but there are people who that is their primary sexual interest.
Okay.
Are the teenage or post-pubescent teens.
Okay, so the word paedophile comes with a charged emotion, and so I was under the impression, just before you thankfully educated me in this, that anyone who has an interest in post-pubescent children that are still underage, we label them as sex offender. That's what I thought. But let's just take these two terms, paedophile term and the sex offender term. From my understanding, the word paedophile is hugely charged with extreme anger, and the word sex offender, not so much so, right? Now, coming from the offenders, these terms and these labels that are hugely charged emotively, I can only imagine that it's keeping a percentage of them quiet about what they've got in their head, because they don't want to be seen by society in this way. And for them to keep quiet about what they've got in their head and battle it on their own is a higher chance of them giving into the temptation one day when they've had a bad day or something has gone bad in their personal life. And that is a danger. Whereas if we had a society that was a bit more open about this, where people could come forward, there was a center where they could go if they recognized and could speak to trusted professionals about what they've got in their head, that could be a good way to prevent them from ever committing the crime. Would you say that this is, I'm talking some sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You are, Jeremy. I mean, and there have been a number of people that I have met with that have said, I wish I had somewhere to go. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to talk to about what was going on in my head. They knew it wasn't normal. They knew it wasn't okay, but they were, scared. And you don't know where to go. Who they didn't know where to go. So if
Okay.
they were able to, potentially there was, a safe space for them to discuss their feelings and get the therapy, it's a good question. Could that prevent offenses from occurring?
Okay. Now, for anybody that is listening to this, that is now starting to feel angry because it feels like this conversation is going down the route of having a level of empathy to the people that commit these crimes, and people who would possibly respond to our conversation and say, you're showing sympathy for them. Why are you supporting them? They are pure evil. You're trying to normalize the crime. What would your initial response be to those people?
Well, I would say I would never normalize sexual offenses. So never. It's not normal, and it's not okay.
Mm,
I have also, with again the thousands of sexual offenders I've worked with, they know this from treatment and with supervision. They will never live a normal life, and once they start going down the path of I want to be normal, that should be a red flag to them.
okay.
So when we talk about empathy, I mean, I think I am I do empathize with people who struggle with this. Is that something any of us would want to have
Right.
to?
Right.
That is, it's not, I under it's not anything any of us would wish to live with
Mm,
or have one of our loved ones live with.
right.
At this, it's just not. And so these are serious struggles, serious issues. But at the same time, no, the death penalty is not something that, we do in society for these offenses, nor really should it be for the vast majority of these offenses. People, we want all people to, I think, be productive members of society if they can, correct? And the other thing I would say, throughout the course of my career, I've arrested thousands of offenders, right? So on supervision, if someone's seriously violating probation or leading themselves down a path of reoffending, filing that petition to revoke their probation grant, arresting them. I've signed thousands of those warrants for people's arrest. I have recommended people go back to prison. I don't believe that everybody wants to change. Those people should be identified because I don't believe they should ever have the right to hurt somebody again. And our court system should recognize when somebody is a repeat offender, someone that has had the opportunity, they've gone to prison, they've gone out on supervision, they have had the opportunity for treatment, but they will not change. Those people, I would argue, should not have the right to live in our
Right.
society. And
Okay.
those are I've been told, I mean, I go to prison sometimes, and I know a lot of the guys in there, and some of them have actually thanked me for putting them in prison.
Okay.
Um, and because they knew it was the right thing um, for us to do at probation. They knew they were on a pathway to potentially hurting someone. And that is why supervision is so important. And we need good supervision in our counties and our states and across the country. We need good supervision and people who know when someone is not getting better, someone who is a risk, someone who's a high risk, someone who has the sexual deviancy. and they are refusing to get better.
Mm,
So I hope that helps your viewers understand
mm.
that we have to identify who the highest risk offenders are and who are the ones that do not want to change their lives and they want to continue to re-victimize people. And those are the people that should be in prison.
Yes. Okay. And then again, very nicely, we come to this idea that there is a spectrum here. We're
Yes.
not dealing with one type of person, because I feel that the conversation around this is based on the prolific offenders that have been offending for decades, the high profile cases that you see on the news. And we think that every offender is like that, and that they cannot be helped and they cannot be productive member of society ever again. When we're not dealing with that, we're dealing with a spectrum of offenders, and we have to deal with this, with the spectrum of offenders, because we can't put them all in prison forever. Now, so a question I always thought was very interesting was, with the whole conversation around they should serve their life in prison, I would like to ask those people, if your son of 19 years old met up with a 15-year-old and did something with her, and it was their first offense, would you want your son locked up in prison for the rest of his life? I don't think any mother's answer to that would be yes. I really don't. I think they would then see, when it's brought into their own home with their own loved ones, that there needs to be, the solution is not to put people in prison for their whole life. Of course, I'm not saying that a 19-year-old meeting a 15-year-old is okay. I'm not saying that at all. It's just dealing with the offense, like we deal with all other offenses, you know. Also, I sometimes think about, if your husband that you truly love had made a mistake, had given into the temptation of watching something that they shouldn't have online, and it was their first ever offense, would you want your husband locked away in prison for life? I just think if we can turn that question around to the person to bring it a bit more closer to home, then maybe we can encourage this conversation around the spectrum. So I think there's a long way to go. I would love to ask you, what was this conversation like 25 years ago, by the way? Was it like, I mean, it's horrendous now. So what was it like then?
Well, we didn't have the internet, right?
Okay.
So I don't think we had conversations, and certainly
Mm,
not the internet aspect,
mm,
which, the internet we know is good and it's bad. I mean,
yes.
we can reach people. You and I are having this conversation, and that's wonderful. But I think back, I think the secrecy though too, I don't know if our media does a good job. I know sometimes the splash in the headlines, I always like to dig deeper. I like to look at, was this person on supervision at the time they committed this crime? Our media doesn't really give us in depth. Do they have a criminal record? Tell me more, because there's always more. So I like to just dig a little deeper when the media gives us a splash, right, of the headline.
Right.
But I think that the internet has changed some, but the internet also sometimes doesn't allow us to have these good conversations like you and I are having if
Mm,
someone just throws up a quick comment. But I would like to see us understand each other more and
mm,
understand this topic, and especially this topic that I'm passionate about.
mm.
Um, More, we should be doing more of this.
Absolutely. And working towards the offense ever happening in the first place, or continuing to happen. Like, that's the goal. And again, for anybody that's listening or watching that was abused in their childhood, I want to ask you, if the person that abused you was somebody that would have sought help if it was available to them, would you have wanted it available to them? I'm going to guess the answer is yes. And I'm not saying that if they sought help, it meant they would have left you alone. I'm not saying that. But if it brought them 1% closer to the chance that they wouldn't have abused you when they came to you, because they had somewhere where they could go, and they were one of these offenders on the spectrum where we're saying that they would seek help if it was available. Would you want them to have sought help? And I'm going to say anyone that's had a experience of abuse in their childhood by an offender would have wanted that offender to have had therapy and had help before they got to them. And again, if you just turn it around and put it in our own court, I just feel like this whole, the problem is saying support or help or working with, is as soon as you say those words, it creates a problem, because nobody wants to be seen to be helping or supporting these people. So I say working with these people. You know, we got to work with these people to make sure they don't repeat the offense. And just to say they're pure evil and they'll always reoffend, well, what, that's our solution. You know, that's what we're just going to go with now and just continue seeing children hurt continuously. We need to have a better conversation around this. So 25 years you worked with sex offenders. And by the way, it's definitely something that I would like to also explore in the future, to get the opportunity to interview offenders and see where they're coming from and what's in their head. I'd love that. You decided to create a consultancy business and start working with victims and their families. Is that right?
Yes, and I do want to say, yes, it was almost 25 years I retired. Most of my career was with sexual offenders. Victims of sex crimes, we worked with them as well when I was with probation. But there's a lot of victims. Here's what happens when many offenders will go to prison for 5 or 10 years, and it is not unique for victims of sex crimes to just want to get on with their life and really not follow their abuser and opt in. We have victims' rights here, and victims who can opt in to kind of follow what's going on with supervision. The vast majority of victims didn't want to do that, but the ones that did, we worked closely with to make sure there's certain things you can't disclose, but things that you're required by law to talk about, and really just be there to listen as well to their concerns. So in consulting, yes, so I now can work with, again, both offenders and their families going through the system, and then also victims of offenses. But a lot of times victims do not want, they just kind of don't want to be a part of that justice system. They just don't, if that makes sense. And then we think we can understand why, and then some do. So it's unique to each victim.
And the traumatic process of going through the justice system is not just with the victim, right? It's with the family, it's with the parents often, and that's I believe it's a complex situation in itself. I mean, of course, I experienced the way that my experience has affected the people around me, my mother, my father, my siblings, my friends. So working with them must be very complex, because the emotions charged with being a mother or father to a child that's been abused, I mean, it's ripping parents' lives apart, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have a couple close friends of mine that are some of the best therapists, and they specialize in victim treatment. And we don't talk about victim treatment enough, and it's a very specialized treatment. So sometimes when victims will say, "Oh, I'm in therapy," or I want to get therapy for my child who's been impacted by sexual assault, I really like to make sure they're with someone who specializes in treating victims of these crimes, because it is a specialized field. And it's just the same as an offender. You want to make sure their therapists are trained in sex offenses. You do not want a therapist to dismiss this as sex addiction, because sex offending is not sex addiction. So there's so you want offenders with therapists who understand sex crimes and sex offending, and you want victims who understand uh, how to heal victims impacted by offenses. And so I do. So, and I'd love for you to talk with them as well. And I think on my YouTube channel, we talk to Missy and I do. She treats victims, and are also our friend Lorena, and they're just wonderful healing victims, and the work that they do is just wonderful. And clarification work is what that can be called. And you know, when you have children who are offended, a lot of times they may be angry at the adults in their lives, that they feel, we understand the offender did what they did and they are solely responsible for their behavior, their choices. But sometimes there are people and victims who they struggle with their parents as well. And so the therapists that I work with really do work on clarifying. You're a child, right? Many of these people they're children. They were innocent. They are innocent people in all of this. And so they just do amazing work, clarification work, and just really healing victims that are impacted by these crimes.
Okay, and can we talk about the word healing? Because I have often felt a resistance to that word, because I feel like it implies that you can be fully mended, that you can be fully fixed. And I don't ever believe that's the case with anything that caused you trauma in your childhood, whatever that be, even if it was your toy got broken and it never got repaired, and that caused you some trauma when you were 4 years old. Like, any level, it's like you carry these scars. Like, we're human beings, that's what life is, right? We are carrying scars, all of us. So I always felt like the word healing practice, or feeling healed, or aiming for healing, I always felt like it's a false promise, because you can never actually achieve that, because you cannot go back in time. But I also understand that the term is very comforting and very hopeful. I just wondered if you had anything to say about that, because before I pass it over, I'm pretty sure that, you know, your colleagues that you've just discussed here, which I'd love to also speak with, by the way, maybe they would say that it's not about achieving full healing. Of course, you can never achieve that. It's about aiming towards something that's hopeful.
No, I love the way you put that, Jeremy. It's so beautiful. And, you know, I definitely would, you know, they're the experts. I would defer to them on that. But what I have noticed just talking with and working with, you know, victims also make a transformation, you know, from when they first start treatment to then maybe even years later. And I can talk to them and I just see that transformation process where they will never be okay with what happened to them, right? You're not okay with it. You've learned things, right? We've learned it's not impacting maybe your daily life in the way that it had. No one wants to go through life every day angry, right? Angry. And I think so, healing some of the anger inside of us, understanding. And so that's why I feel these therapists they're just so amazing, because the transformation, I guess, that people make in their treatment classes, in their private sessions with the therapist, I see a transformation in them, and it's so beautiful. You know, it really is.
That's incredible. That is, you know, that's so incredible. On the last 3 events that I've spoken at, by the way, adult events, I've had 3 people come up to me, one on each occasion, and disclose for the first time, right? 2 ladies in their 50s and 1 man in his 60s. So let's just talk about this man in his 60s. My goodness, it was such a powerful moment. He came up to me and you could see, it's almost like I could see his nerves and his fear, because I could see myself in him when I first disclosed, and the body language really told it. And he just came up to me and he said, "Look, that was great presentation. And after hearing your story, I just felt compelled to come and tell you, same thing happened to me." And I never told anybody about it. You're the first person I've ever told. I'm 63. I
Wow.
went through in my 20s, I went through some chaotic points. I was angry, I was frustrated, and I acted it out in various ways in my behavior. But then I settled down, and I've just parked it, and it's all good. It happened. The person who did it to me is now dead, and I just wanted to tell you that. Now, then I'm obviously give them the best reaction that I possibly can, suited to the situation. We chat for a couple more minutes, and when they shake my hand and say thank you, the transformation in that 5 minutes is just phenomenal. Now they've got a bit of a smile. They feel brave. You can see their body posture has changed. Like there's a bravery about it. And then they go off to their life, and it continues as it did. And so I understand what you're saying about this transformation. And like you say, working with professionals from the first ever time you disclose to possibly reporting it, to telling your family, to acknowledging it yourself and learning how to live with it, and trying to heal the anger. Like, that's a true transformation, and it's phenomenal. And then you make me think about the transformation that we would hope to see in offenders in the same way. In the same way, they acknowledge something is incorrect. Maybe they've offended already, and now they're going to work towards not offending again. And just before I pass it over, we know that that is not all the offenders. We know there are a good percentage of offenders that just don't care, and they will continue offending. They don't care if they're in and out of prison. They don't care. They talk with people who think, like, joke and laugh about this. We know that there's that type of offender. But we also know that there are some offenders we are going to be able to transform so that they never offend again. And that is the number one goal.
Yes, absolutely. That is the number one goal, is no more victims and healing the next generation, right? Making the next generation better, healthier, right? And talking about this will, I think, make the next generation better, and
Yeah.
probably and less impacted by sexual offending. And I think that's what we all want.
Yes, absolutely. Do you ever get any kickback? Did you ever get any kickback, in particular when you were working in prisons with sex offenders? I'm pretty sure you had 1,000 times people saying, "Oh, why do you want to work with them?" And did you have any general kickback?
Always. I mean, that was a question I often got. Why do you work with that population? Why do you want to work with, with those offenders? And I thought, I would often say, I mean, I liked the challenge of working with that population. I liked the psychology behind this is fascinating to me. But I also wanted to be a part of either really helping someone change and not ever reoffend again, which I feel like is a gift to society when you're working in law enforcement, you're working in that field. If you can help someone never offend again, what a gift I could give my community and my society and my community and I felt that, and I believe that. And it is difficult work. I commend officers that work in this field. At the same time, also work with victims and families and helping people understand this population much better. So it was challenging. It is challenging, but I just think that overwhelmingly, if I can help someone never reoffend again, I want to do that. I want to do that.
My goodness, it's so powerful, It's so
And
powerful.
like I said earlier, Jeremy, and the other thing is, either you're going to get better, or we get to, file that PTR when I was back with law enforcement and put you back in prison if you're not going to change. And so it kind of went both ways, either really helping people not offend again, and then if not, yeah, you're going to go back before the court and the judge and tell them why you can't do that, and you'll probably go to prison.
Okay, so that is such a great point. So working with offenders, well, for anybody that's saying, why would you ever want to do that? Well, there's a reason, because we're either going to try to get them to not reoffend, and we're going to work with them, but we're going to, in that process, it's also going to be highlighted to us whether these people need to go back inside because they are not going to change. So regardless of what the outcome is, side A or side B, we work towards, it's working towards prevention. Working with sex offenders is working towards prevention, period. Because we either help them transform, and if they're not willing to transform, they get resentenced.
Yes. They go
So
back
it's a
before the judge.
win-win. It's a win-win situation.
Yes. And that's how I see it, Jeremy.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I don't think you can debate that. I don't think that's it's undeniable that the point you made there is so strong. And what's interesting is I've been doing this now full time for 4 years. I'm in my 5th year of working in these circles, and I swear, for every 1,000 organizations that I come across that are victim focused, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. Of course, that is necessary. But for every 1,000, I come across one which is offender focused. And I feel like that is not the correct weighting, of our time. Like, of course, we must incredibly support the people that have been through these horrific crimes. But actually, in an ideal world, that support would not be needed. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get rid of all the victim focused charities. Like, we want to live in a world where there's no need for them anymore. So we want to do them out of business. That's actually what we want.
Yes, absolutely. And the one thing too, Jimmy, I often tell people is victims and offenders really do, they want the same things. They do, because I can talk to both sides. They want accountability, they want fairness, they want justice. That's proper. And they don't want anybody re-offended again. They don't. And so if we can somehow bridge these gaps and work together, and educate, and I've worked with a lot of families where incest has
Right.
been a generational, from generation to generation, passed on, and that family being in therapy, and what these therapists can do with these families, again, more transformation. You have offenders, but you also have victims, all in the same family. And
wow.
everyone, yeah, it's very it's that those families have to do a lot of work to come together and try to transform, so then the next generation in their family is not impacted by sexual abuse.
Wow.
And like I said, the therapists that I've worked with over the years, I can't give them more kudos and credit for the amazing work that they've done. And these families impacted by incest, that is so hard to talk about, right? That is, if your family is a family that's been impacted by generational sexual abuse, by whether it's grandfather, uncle, or brother, and just that's what happens. They all come together when it's finally someone's in the justice system, and they want to change their family.
Wow.
And it's just powerful to watch that occur.
Wow. So fascinating and incredible and great information. So Beth, we're coming up to the hour now. It's gone so quickly, and this conversation is full of information and insight. So I really appreciate that. Please, can you tell everyone where they can find you, please?
Yes, I'm on Instagram. BHG Consulting Group is my Instagram. Missy, who's a therapist, a friend of mine, we do Beth and Missy Talk on YouTube. My website for my company is www.bhgconsultinggroup.com. You can message me there, or on Instagram, and also on our YouTube channel, Beth and Missy Talk.
Thank you so much. And I encourage everyone that's listening or watching to go and check out those links. We will put them also in the show notes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this conversation. If you felt like it was challenging, of course it is. We're trying to advance this conversation with every episode that we release. Please share it around your friends, share it around your family, get the conversation going. We're releasing this on YouTube and in audio format now because we're beginning to build this project step by step. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to the next episode.